Hello, everybody. My name is Grace Hillsmeyer, and this is a training that I put together with my partner Sylvia Haywood. And what we wanted to talk to you all today about is supporting your dually identified MLLs. And what we mean by that are your multilingual learners who are diagnosed with some kind of disability, maybe a specific learning disability, maybe a speech impediment, maybe a behavioral disability like ADHD, things like that that can complicate the modifications that you would normally give to your MLLs. So before we get started, we all know how teachers love their acronyms, and I think teachers of English learners are probably some of the worst offenders for that. So as you can see, there are many acronyms. The one that I will use the most is MLL, Multilingual Learner. This is the one that is favored by the state of Indiana, but sometimes you might hear people say ELL or EL. These are basically interchangeable. The field just sometimes changes their mind or disagrees about which one is most appropriate. So I will be using multilingual learner most of the time. Some other things you might see as you go about your life and you learn more about MLLs, a lot of people will say ESL. You might also hear EAL, English as an additional language, because some students, English maybe isn't their second language. Maybe they learned it at the same time they learned another language, or maybe they know 3 languages. You'll also see ESOL, English for speakers of other languages, or ENL, English as a new language. But again, in practice, these words tend to be used interchangeably. They tend to mean basically the same thing. Because we are talking about special education, there are some other acronyms that might come up. When we talk about students from other ethnicities and other cultures, you might see the word CLD. We will be talking about the stages of a second language acquisition, or SLA. We will be talking about SLDs and SLIs, specific learning disabilities and specific language impairments, and some other miscellaneous things in here. Many of you probably already know that our special education students have IEPs, and our MLLs have ILPs, individualized learning plans. So our dually identified students will have both. ELLs are more likely than the general population to be misdiagnosed with a disability. A lot of times, especially when they're really young, they might be struggling to learn, they might not be progressing as quickly as their teacher expects them to, and that teacher, meaning well, might refer them for special education testing. However, a lot of the supposed problems that English learners encounter are actually normal stages of second language acquisition, or SLA. Okay, and this gives you an idea of why this is a problem. So students with specific learning disabilities, as of 2016, they represented 5% of our total public school population. However, 12% of English learners are diagnosed with a learning disability. So what we can see here is that they are overrepresented based on their proportion to the rest of the population. The normal phases of second language acquisition can be a little strange to people who are unfamiliar with them. So the first thing that happens is students go through a silent period where they just don't know enough language to confidently participate in conversation. So sometimes teachers worry that these students have anxiety, or they worry that the student doesn't know how to speak. A lot of times this is shyness. A lot of times they actually could talk to you, but they need a little more time to think about it, because remember, they're taking in everything you're saying. They are translating it into their home language. Then they have to think about what they want to say, often in their home language, and then they have to retranslate it before they can say it back to you. So a lot of the time, it's just a lot of work for them to talk, especially in those early stations. So you should not worry if a newcomer is listening and not speaking to you, and a lot of times they understand more than they're able to articulate. In early production, you might get a couple words here and there, yes, no, good morning, bathroom, things like that. as speech begins to emerge, and we're talking, over a period of months, they start to be able to do those high frequency conversations. Miss, can I go to the bathroom? Yes, you may. I need a pencil. Those things that you say all the time. In beginning fluency, that's when they start to make friends. That's when they start to be able to engage in play and in casual conversation with their classmates. And then in intermediate fluency, they'll start to appear fluent, and this is where things can get a little dangerous. And then in advanced fluency, that's after several years, usually somewhere between like 3 and 7 or maybe even more years. That's when your student acquires fluency. So sometimes we have to be patient. Language learning is also not linear, so you might have a student who pops into beginning fluency and then they take a couple steps back because they are working on developing some kind of other skill or because something changed in their life. So all of this is normal. None of that should be considered a disability right off the bat. Again, students in beginning fluency and intermediate fluency can appear fully fluent, especially if you're watching them kind of giggle and laugh with their friends. However, you should still expect them to have gaps in their vocabulary, sometimes in unexpected places. Like I had a student who seemed very, very fluent and then couldn't tell me his favorite food because he eats most of his food at home, right? And, we don't talk about food at school very much. So the words that he knows for food, he knows in Spanish, and he doesn't know them in English. So you'll see gaps in vocabulary pop up in unexpected places, which can certainly cause them to struggle with reading comprehension. As I said, they need more processing time. If the kid does not answer your question right away, they may very well know the answer, but they're trying to think about it and put it together, and it's just going to take them some time. They may also have difficulty processing and producing sounds that are not present in their home language. So, for example, I took a couple of Polish classes in college. There are sounds in the Polish language that I cannot hear. I cannot distinguish them from other sounds that I know in English. So if you have that, you have to look into their home language and see, okay, is this a sound processing disorder, or does that sound just not exist in their home language, and that's why they cannot hear it clearly? None of these things by themselves are signs of a disability. With appropriate support, MLLs should be able to master grade level content. So support from an ENL teacher, things like visual aids, supports in their home language. The thing you really need to look out for is, are the struggles I'm seeing consistent in their home language? Are they, because if they have a disability, it will cross through both languages. If they don't have that difficulty in their home language, then it's language. It's not a disability. Okay, but if you're seeing a really, really long silent period, like longer than a year, if you're seeing inconsistent ability to remember, because ELLs can have trouble with their memory. It's hard to remember when you don't understand, but if their memory is inconsistent from day to day, if they're having difficult with sounds that are present in their home language, then we might be seeing a disability. So again, using their home language is really important. A lot of people mistakenly believe that students should only speak English all the time. That is not true. Their home language is a powerful tool to help them learn and also to help us determine whether or not they actually have a disability. So students will have an ILP and an IEP if they are English learners and if they have been diagnosed with a disability. Keep in mind that both of these things in the eyes of the law are equal. Your ILP is going to help you understand what accommodations they need for their language proficiency, and that will be written by the ENL teacher. An IEP is our accommodations for our special education students. Both of them are legally binding and important. If you suspect one of your ELLs or MLLs has a disability, please understand their parents have the legal right to be contacted in a language they understand. Parents have a legal right to a translator. According to the IDEA, language proficiency must be ruled out as a cause of learning difficulty. difficulty. So again, we have to look at their home language and ask ourselves if they are also having that difficulty in their home language. If you suspect that an MLL has a disability, make sure you talk to the ENL teacher. They may know a little more about that kid and their background. If you don't have one, ask who your ENL compliance officer is. Your building should have one. Speak with the student's parents, with the help of a translator if necessary. Most of Indiana's multilingual learners were born in America, so their parents may be more proficient than you suspect. Don't assume they don't speak English. They might. Advocate for evaluation in English and the home language, and ensure that the people who are evaluating the student know that they have to rule out language proficiency because they may not be aware of that. So once a student is diagnosed, first of all, stay in communication. If you're a general education teacher, make sure you're talking to the special ed teachers and the ENL teachers. We want a whole image of the child. Lots of things can affect what kinds of accommodations are appropriate. Some things that are good for most MLLs are letting them communicate with pictures and drawings, using charts, tables, and sentence starters, supporting them with visual aids and manipulatives, anything you can do to add context, things they can hold, things you can show them. And give them frequent low-stakes opportunities to speak. Sometimes people are hesitant to call on English learners because they don't want to put them on the spot, but they have to get comfortable practicing speaking. So even little things like having the whole class repeat something you said, or calling on them to give some kind of one-word answer, these frequent low-stakes opportunities. And finally, using leveled questions. A leveled question is something that you can think about for students at different stages. So if you have a student in the silent period who's not ready to talk, can you ask them to point to something? Can you give them a picture and say, hey, we're learning about triangles. Can you point to all the triangles? We're learning about biotic and abiotic factors. Here's some pictures. Can you point to all the things that are biotic? You can ask them a yes-no question once they move into early production. Is this a triangle? Yes or no? Do they know? Is this buoyant? Is this a simile? Yes or no? As they begin to emerge, sentence frames are a wonderful thing. I use these a lot in my classroom. So you might start the sentence for them. Image 3 is a triangle because it has what? 3 sides. Okay, right? They just have to finish the thought. What is this? A triangle. Yes, it's a triangle because it has, and then the kid just has to fill in that blank. And as they become more proficient, you can shorten and shorten those sentence stems. You might need to continue to help them with elaboration. Our students who have WIDA scores of 3 and 4, usually that's where they are. They've got the basics, but they need help with elaborating and justifying their opinion. If you have any questions or you need more information, here's my email address and my partner's email address. Coloring Colorado is a great website with a lot of really good resources, and we have also attached a link to the Indiana IEP Resource Center. Here are our references. Thank you so much for viewing this training. I hope you learned something useful. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us with anything that you might need.